Senator
Yes,
Lindsey
sir.
Graham, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Senator, you are one of the strongest Republican supporters of Ukraine and of US military assistance to Ukraine. Would you acknowledge that right now the war isn't going the way you wanted it to, or indeed the way you expected it to just a few months ago?
Not at all. I think it's going exceedingly well. I just got back from Ukraine last Wednesday. There's major breakthroughs in the south. The landmine situation was incredible. I could not be more proud of how they've used the military equipment provided by our countries. They're putting pressure. They've broken through the first defensive line. I think they'll split the Russian forces in Crimea in the next couple of weeks, months. So I am exceedingly proud of the Ukrainian military.
Well, that is extraordinarily upbeat, if I may say so, compared with what we see in leaks from classified Pentagon documents suggesting, and I'm quoting here from a leak in the Washington Post, that Kiev won't fulfill its principal objective of severing that land bridge to Crimea in this year's counteroffensive.
No, I think they're wrong. Those same people told us Kiev would fall in 4 days, that the whole country would be in Russian hands in 2 weeks. I go there enough to know what's real and what's not. It's been extremely tough sledding because of all the mines, but when they get contact with the Russians fold pretty quickly. You got a bunch of conscripts that would rather not die in Ukraine if they didn't have to. You got highly motivated Ukrainian civilian population and soldiers. No, I am very pleased. It has been slower than some thought, but when you look at what's happened in the last 48 hours, good news awaits us here.
I'll tell you what's also been slower than you wanted. That is the scale and the quality of US military assistance. Months and months ago, you were talking about getting F-16s into the battle space. It hasn't happened yet. It's clearly not going to happen until next year. Also, Abrams tanks, which were pledged a long time ago, they are still not on the battlefield.
Well, they completed training yesterday, the Abrams training. I have been very frustrated, along with Democrats, quite frankly, to provide game-changing weapons that the Ukrainians can use to evict the Russians to your country. The Storm Shadow has been a game changer. It is a missile that can be launched inside of Ukraine and hit deep inside Crimea. So now they do have cluster bombs. They're really wreaking havoc on fortified infantry positions. The Abrams tank is due to show up soon. It'll be months before the F-16 gets there, but the HIMARS, the weapon systems they need have been slow to get there, but once they arrive in theater, the Ukrainians are using them to good effect. I think the slowness has extended the war and allowed the Russians to get more fortified, but I do want to thank the Biden administration for sticking with it.
You're also looking somewhat isolated these days inside your own party. The Republican Party still is committed to this fight on Ukraine's behalf, but the fact is, if you look at the polling evidence, Republican voters are moving away from support for Ukraine.
It's about 1-to-1, and what you see is that, like, I think a lot of Republicans are frustrated that we're not all in to win it. Nobody wants American troops. And, you know, after 20 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, this is not an unusual situation. What's happening here is I tell my colleagues we need to sell the war better. If Putin wins, there goes China. Most Republicans believe it was a mistake to withdraw from Afghanistan. It set in motion the bad guys. Well, here's what I would tell my Republican colleagues. If you think Biden made a mistake getting out of Afghanistan, if you pull the plug on Ukraine, that's Afghanistan on steroids. If we give up on supporting Ukraine, who doesn't want any soldiers, they just want the weapons, then that's a signal to China we're not up to the task. So and Putin will not stop in Ukraine. It's beginning to turn, I think. The more battlefield success, the better the numbers will be.
Senator, how does what you just said square with your fulsome support of Donald Trump as the Republican nominee for president? Donald Trump plainly does not agree with you when it comes to Ukraine.
I don't think Donald Trump plainly states anything about Ukraine.
Well, what he plainly stated a while ago is, if I were president, I'll end the war in 1 day. It's going to take 24 hours. That deal between Zelensky and Putin, he said, would be easy. The only way that can make sense is if Trump wants a deal which allows Russia to retain Ukrainian territory, and you know it.
Yeah, well, here's what I can tell about President Trump. He provided javelins on his watch that allowed the Ukrainians to stop the advance, so that was a good thing. Here's what I would say about ending the war in 24 hours. You're not. This is sort of typical Trump, that I'll bring the war to conclusion.
It's nonsense, isn't it?
No. Well, I think it's real that if Trump were president, they wouldn't have invaded Ukraine.
But with greatest respect, that's irrelevant. What matters now, if you are serious about backing Donald Trump for president, is what Trump would do if he were in the White House. Mike Pence, who of course was his running mate and his vice president, says if you talk about solving it in a day, that means you give Vladimir Putin what he wants.
Yeah, I don't see it that way. I know Trump pretty well. If he gets to be president, he's got a decent chance of it. By next year, by the November of 2024, I think the Ukrainians are going to have major battlefield success. President Trump's not going to pull the defeat from the jaws of victory. I'm very confident that the Republican Senate will support a supplemental. The point you make is legitimate. I think there are people in Europe that are trying to, like the Germans, how does this end? Let me tell you how it ends.
But in a sense, what I'm most interested in is the impact this debate inside your party is having on Vladimir Putin. To quote Dan Fried, a respected former US ambassador, he says, Putin thinks he can outlast the Americans because he thinks political support for Ukraine will be compromised if Donald Trump wins.
Well, he's made a series of miscalculations. That would be one of them. We're not going to pull the plug on Ukraine. We're going to continue to support the Ukrainian efforts to evict the Russians. Putin's made the blunder of the 21st century. He invaded, thinking he would quickly wipe out the country. He has larger NATO today than before the invasion. The ruble is in the toilet, and he has an arrest warrant against him. We're not going to let him get away with this. So I feel really confident that the Ukrainians can win, and there'll be support at home. And I want to say something about the British government. They've been terrific.
What on earth has happened to your Republican Party? If you look at the three, it seems by the polls, the three leading contenders for the nomination for president candidate status right now, that is Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy, all of them in one way or another are saying, we need to end our commitment to Ukraine now. There needs to be peace now, and that means we negotiate with Putin.
Yeah.
Now, you don't agree with any of that, and yet these are the three people most likely to lead your party into the next election.
I think they're reflecting some of the unease in the Republican Party about how this war ends. A lot of frustration with Biden, the way he's conducted the war. But here's what I will tell you. The next commander-in-chief in 2025 is going to have a situation, I think, where Putin's on his back foot, and to pull the plug would be the biggest mistake any American president could make. One thing about Trump, you know, he talked about getting Afghanistan, and he set in motion the withdrawal, but he kept 2,500 troops there. Let me tell you something that most people don't understand. Trump is very glad he didn't pull the plug on Afghanistan on his watch. He saw what happened afterwards. And I've told him, if you or anybody gives Putin a lifeline, that's the worst single signal you could send to China.
You've told him? And what did he say?
Well, I think he understands
it. Be straight with me. What did he say to you?
He says, the best way to defend Taiwan is not have to go to war, convince the Chinese that it'd be the downside is larger than the upside, to be strong. And I said, well, Mr. President, how does Ukraine fit in? If the Chinese see us pull the plug on Ukraine to give Putin a lifeline, you better get ready for a war with China. And I don't think he believes that's a unrealistic scenario. Ron DeSantis is kind of all over the board. Here's where we run into problems. Everybody wants to thump their chest about China, and that's good. Let's stand up to the Chinese. Here's what I would tell Democrats, Republicans. To be weak in Ukraine means that you lose Taiwan.
Just one other point on foreign policy, because I do want to get to domestic matters, but on foreign policy, you've worked closely with Democrats on Ukraine.
Yeah.
I notice you're also quite
They've been
involved.
terrific, by the way.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party has been terrific.
And I notice you are working with the Biden administration on a very ambitious Mid-East vision, which involves reaching out to MBS, as we call him, Saudi Arabia's crown prince, to be the architect of a peace deal with Israel, which would pull the Saudis in and which presumably would offer something to the Palestinians. There's much debate about whether Biden can deliver this. Do you believe he can, and are you helping him?
Well, for a year I've been helping. It started with the Abraham Accords. President Trump, on his watch, signed the Abraham Accords, where the UAE and other Arab nations normalized relationships with Israel. That was a big accomplishment. The next logical step is Saudi Arabia, which is the big prize, right? So the Biden administration is trying to build on the Abraham Accords. They have been negotiating very closely with Saudi Arabia, and I'll tell you what the deal would look like. Saudi Arabia wants a defense agreement with the United States that's bigger than the individual president.
Security guarantees.
Yes. They want a defense agreement that would transcend a presidency. They want more certainty in the relationship. So,
and you think the U.S. is right to consider that when we know what happened to Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist murdered in Istanbul. We know the human rights abuses that continue in Saudi Arabia, and you're absolutely foursquare for that deal.
Let me tell you why. Because the Crown Prince and the King are moving the country in a different direction. I just got back. I thought I would never go after Khashoggi. I was really, really hard. I talked to the president. I've talked to Sullivan. I've talked to McGurk. The Saudis are investing $1 trillion to change their economy. They're building new cities. Women can drive. You can go as a woman out unescorted. He's making a bet to fundamentally change his country and to modernize it. I told him personally, you will never get your money back until you change the brand of your country. I could not give away a free trip to Saudi Arabia and South Carolina today. What would change that relationship or that brand? Get an agreement with the United States, recognize Israel, then all doors are open.
All right. I want to go to domestic matters now. So let's get to Donald Trump for president, what it means for the United States. He is now facing 4 criminal trials in the coming year. The bottom line is there are some really serious charges here, including allegations, which of course Trump still denies, charges that he was involved in an effort to subvert the outcome of the 2020 election. You know this is serious stuff. And yet you're telling the American people this is still the guy that should be in the White House.
I'm seeing the legal system weaponized. The jurisdictions he's been prosecuted in are incredibly liberal. We all saw January the 6th. I don't hold him criminally liable for what happened on January 6th. He didn't go in the Capitol. Here's why he's doing better. There's a backlash among conservatives against the prosecution of Trump for everything all the time. The liberal media throughout the world is trying to marginalize him every day. We believe, those who support him believe, he's the best person we could send into the arena to stand up to the liberal media.
Yeah, you're getting political. I just want to stay legal for a moment.
We're seeing the legal situation political.
Yeah, well, this is the nub of it, isn't it? You're an experienced lawyer. All that is happening to Donald Trump, it isn't weaponization. It is simply investigation, prosecution, and due process. And you are delegitimizing America's judicial system.
Well, I believe in equal application of the law. So, classified information being mishandled in Mar-a-Lago. Classified information during the Clinton years wound up on Anthony Weiner's computer. We know people in the Clinton orbit took leech bit to wipe out.
Well, this is what we call whataboutery. You're going to point to Hillary Clinton.
It's about two people doing the same thing. One guy gets prosecuted, the other one doesn't.
It clearly isn't. Hillary Clinton's misuse of classified information was fully investigated. No charges were brought. The point about Donald Trump is that he is going through due process.
Have you heard what's happened with Hunter Biden? The effort not to prosecute Clinton was legendary. We have 2 whistleblowers telling us that the FBI and the IRS at every turn gave Hunter Biden breaks that nobody else gets.
What about a plea deal
that was rejected by the judge? And why not? I have nothing against Hunter Biden. I hate it when anybody's family gets in trouble. But you don't get that most conservatives believe there's a double standard in the law in America today when it comes to political figures.
Whataboutery of a classic kind. Hunter Biden now faces his own special counsel investigation.
Yeah,
let's see where the chips fall.
They picked the guy.
I would like you to return to Donald Trump. Bill Barr, who was appointed Attorney General by Donald Trump, says these federal cases are legitimate. So why can you not accept that due process means he has to have his day in court? The question for you is whether it's appropriate for that man, who may be in prison by the time of the November 2024 election, that man be your candidate for president.
Here's what I would tell Mr. Barr and anybody else. Be careful of charges being brought by political figures in deeply political areas. There'll be a day under this theory where some Texas prosecutor will go after a Democrat for allowing illegal immigrants to come across the state of Texas and murder, rape, and pillage. What I worry about is that you've got a county prosecutor, a city prosecutor, bringing charges in very liberal venues. You got the special counsel, January 6th special counsel. Let's see how all this plays out. The reason Republicans are going to nominate Donald Trump is they see the accusations against him being designed to reduce his ability to be president, not as righting wrongs. That's the way most Republicans look at it.
How far, Senator Graham, are you prepared to take this? If Donald Trump is convicted in one of these 4 trials before November 2024, will you still support him as the Republican nominee?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I don't know what he's going to be convicted of, but generally speaking, I'm not going to let these prosecutions affect my ability to support President Trump. I see these prosecutions more political than anything else.
A clear majority of Americans right now approve of the Justice Department indicting Donald Trump. That's from an August 16 poll from the Associated Press. And 2/3 of Americans right now have an unfavorable view of Donald Trump. This isn't working well for you.
And 75% of Americans think Joe Biden's too old to run. 70% of Americans think we're on the wrong track, that the Biden presidency's been a disaster. What would America like to see? Not to have a rematch. That's the truth. If you ask the average American, would you like to have a rematch between Trump and Biden? They say no. The problem is that nobody's going to beat Trump in our primary because he's seen as the type guy to fix the problems we face today.
Yeah, but maybe that's an act of self-harm amongst Republicans. Listen to these words from the Republican governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu. Trump can't win in a general elections. Independents hate all of this stuff that surrounds Donald Trump. There is no way Trump wins more than 30% of independents, and that's why, with Trump, Republicans get crushed.
Well, why isn't he running? If you look at the numbers Joe Biden has, there's no way he gets elected. Well, I think he could get reelected. I think Donald Trump could get a second term. Why? We're going to be Trump-Biden. That's 90% sure we're going to have the same 2 characters. How does Trump win? It doesn't have to be this way. Our border can be secured, we can be safer, we can be energy independent, we can be respected on the world stage all again, and we can lower inflation. I did it once, I can do it again. And what Biden will say, you know, all the drama that we've had for the last 4 years only gets worse. The American people probably are going to have to pick from these 2 candidates. Whether you like it or not, that's probably what's going to happen.
Senator, isn't the truth that you have conceded, indeed in a book recently, you conceded that Trump has, quote, personality problems, has a darkness within him, but you stick with Trump because you still want to be senator for South Carolina and you know you'll be killed in your own party if you abandon Donald Trump. Isn't that the truth? It's pure opportunism.
No, it goes this way. There's a dark side to Donald Trump. And to be honest with you, he was a very good president from my point of view. I'm sticking with him because I saw what he did. He secured a broken border. We had the lowest illegal crossings on his watch in history. We had the strongest economy for working class people in history. He killed Soleimani. He took the war to ISIS in Syria and wiped them out. We were energy independent. He appointed judges that I recommended to him that are very conservative court. I'm judging him by what he did as president. I think he can do all those things again. He got a vaccine developed in record time. So that's why I'm supporting President Trump.
Aren't you ignoring the most important point, that right now America faces the prospect of a guy being tried for his involvement in what amounted to a sort of half-baked coup attempt, a guy running for president who divides your country? All of the surveys suggest that more and more Americans are fearful of violence, political violence, in the run-up to 2024. Are you?
No, I'm not. I hope people will not resort to violence. I urge you not. If you don't like Trump, vote against him. So here's what I would say about the narrative in Europe and in our media. Conservatives have just about had it with this, that somehow if you support Trump, you're supporting tyranny. We don't see it that way. We see
what do you call January 6th?
It was a bad day. I was there in the building. I condemned the hell out of it.
Donald Trump calls it a beautiful thing. He says there was a lot of love on January 6th.
Well, there wasn't a lot of love in the Capitol. Everybody who violated the Capitol should go to jail. Defile the Capitol should go to jail. But we're not going to talk about that.
You're not going to face reality, Senator. That's the truth. And that's why there are serious people in the United States worried about the potential for civil strife, political civil war. Robert Pape at the University of Chicago, he wrote this Dangers to Democracy report. It says the number of Americans who believe that use of force is justified to restore Trump to the White House has increased markedly. He estimates maybe 18 million Americans believe that force would be justified to put Trump back in the White House.
Well, anybody that uses force to try to put a person in the White House is going to jail. So the narrative that Trump...
These are people inside your party.
Well, I don't know who they are. I don't know who he polled. It's the University of Chicago. But here's what most Republicans feel about this narrative, that the Democrats, nobody in the liberal media, covered the burning down of Portland, the attacks on police officers in New York and Chicago. That's a one-sided deal. You should be afraid of conservatives. They will destroy your country. The prime minister here in Italy is being called a fascist because she wants to have strong immigration. Conservatives all over the world are not going to be intimidated by this kind of rhetoric. We're going to show up based on policy. We're going to campaign. We're going to take back the Senate, hopefully hold the House. President Trump has at least a 50-50 chance of winning. And this idea of prosecuting him for 91 offenses in very liberal jurisdictions is not going to change anything. If he wins, you have to ask yourself, why do people still support him? Because they see in him somebody that produced results, that made our country stronger and safer, somebody strong enough to stand up to these attacks that can get America back on course at a time we're sliding. That's why he has this support.
Senator Lindsey Graham, thank you very much for joining me on Hard Talk.
Enjoy it. Thank you so much.